Hey there, sleepyhead, I'm so glad you're here. This is the perfect moment to slow down and simply listen. Before we begin, don't forget to tap like and hit subscribe so we can share more quiet nights together. And leave a comment. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? The neon glow of downtown Los Angeles shimmered against the tinted windows of a sleek black limousine. Inside, Madeline, 22, nervously adjusted her red dress. Tonight was her first real arrangement with a man she'd only known through messages on a sugar dating site. He called himself Mr. Carlyle, older, successful, dripping with luxury. His profile promised candlelit dinners, expensive gifts, and the thrill of living outside the ordinary. Madeline had been nervous, but his tone in the messages was teasing, almost playful. Wear something daring. I like confidence. You'll be spoiled tonight, but I want to see if you can handle it. The limo pulled up to a towering mansion on the edge of the city. Its windows glowed faintly, but something about the building seemed off. Like the lights flickered slower than normal, stretching shadows unnaturally across the lawn. The driver opened the door. "He's waiting inside," he said with an odd half-smile. Madeline stepped out, heart pounding, heels clicking against the marble steps. She pushed open the grand double doors and entered a lavish foyer lit by golden chandeliers. Everything smelled faintly of roses and old wood. And then she saw him. Mr. Carlyle stood at the top of the staircase, tall, sharply dressed in a black suit. His smile was warm, but his eyes, too dark, almost liquid in the dim light. "Welcome, my dear," he said, voice deep and velvety. "You look even better than I imagined." Madeline forced a playful smile. "I hope I meet your standards." Carlyle's gaze lingered, almost hungrily. "Oh, you will. Tonight, you'll have everything you desire. But remember, every gift has a price." His words felt teasing, maybe even naughty, but the way he said them made her skin prickle. Madeline followed Carlyle into a vast dining hall. The table stretched impossibly long, covered with silver platters of food she didn't recognize. Meats glazed so perfectly they glistened, fruits darker than cherries, wine that shimmered black instead of red. "Sit," he said softly, pulling out a chair for her. His hand brushed her bare shoulder as she sat, and though the touch was light, it sent a strange shiver through her. She tried to joke, keeping it playful. "You weren't kidding about spoiling me." Carlyle poured her a glass of that strange black wine. "Spoiling you," he said, leaning close enough that his lips nearly grazed her ear, "is only half the fun." Madeline blushed, then quickly sipped from the glass to cover her nerves. The taste was rich, sweet at first, but then bitter, almost metallic, as though she'd bitten her lip. Carlyle watched her closely, his smile curling at the edges. "Do you like it?" "It's different," she admitted, setting the glass down. He chuckled, deep and low. "Different can be dangerous, but it can also be delicious." The chandelier lights dimmed slightly. Madeline blinked. Was it her imagination, or did the shadows along the walls move when she wasn't looking? Carlyle tapped the table with one long finger. "Tell me, Madeline, what do you want most from this arrangement? Money? Gifts? Freedom from your dull little world?" She hesitated. "Maybe a little of all three?" His eyes gleamed. "Good, because I can give you more than you've ever dreamed. But..." His smile sharpened. "You'll have to trust me, completely." He lifted a small velvet box from the table and slid it toward her. Inside, nestled in black silk, was a necklace, delicate, silver, with a crimson stone at its center that seemed to pulse faintly like a heartbeat. "Wear it," Carlyle whispered, "and you'll never be ordinary again." Madeline hesitated, heart pounding. Something about the stone drew her in, seductive, almost hypnotic. But at the same time, every instinct screamed, "Don't touch it." Madeline's fingers hovered over the velvet box. The crimson stone pulsed softly, like it was alive, like it was waiting for her. Carlyle leaned closer, his cologne rich and dark, his voice smooth. "Go on, try it. I want to see how it looks against your skin." His tone was teasing, almost naughty, but the hunger in his eyes felt different. Too intense, too sharp. Madeline gave a nervous laugh. "You're really laying it on thick, huh?" Carlyle only smiled, tilting his head like a predator watching prey. "I enjoy watching someone surrender." She swallowed hard, then fastened the necklace around her neck. The instant the stone touched her skin, a shock of heat coursed through her chest, spreading into her veins. Her breath hitched. "God, what is this?" she whispered. Carlyle's smile widened, revealing teeth just a little too white, a little too sharp. "It's a promise." The chandelier flickered. Madeline blinked. Her reflection in the polished silver platters looked distorted, her eyes darker, her skin pale as if the necklace was draining her. She ripped her gaze away and looked at Carlyle, but his shadow behind him was wrong. It stretched up the wall unnaturally tall, horns curling from its head, fingers too long to be human. Madeline's pulse raced. You're not..." He placed a finger against her lips, gently, almost lovingly. "Shh. Don't ruin the moment. You wanted luxury. You wanted danger. You wanted to be spoiled." His eyes burned now, glowing faintly red. "And I'm giving you exactly that." The food on the table began to rot before her eyes, meats blackening, fruit writhing with worms, the black wine bubbling thick like blood. Madeline shoved her chair back, her heels skidding on the marble floor. "This isn't what I signed up for." Carlyle stood calmly, straightening his suit. "On the contrary, it's exactly what you signed up for." The necklace tightened around her throat like a living thing. She clawed at it, panic rising, but the stone pulsed harder, and the whispers began. Soft voices filling the hall, chanting from nowhere and everywhere at once. Carlyle's grin split wider. "Welcome to your real arrangement, my dear." Madeline staggered backward, clutching at the necklace as it constricted tighter, digging into her skin. Her breaths came sharp and shallow. The chandelier above rattled violently, its golden light warping into a sickly red glow. "Take it off!" she screamed, her voice cracking. Carlyle descended the stairs slowly, each step echoing through the hall. "Why would you want to take it off? Look at you, radiant, chosen." His words were silk, but his eyes were hungry flames. The shadows in the corners of the room began to move, stretching, unfurling, rising into shapes that resembled people, but were twisted, faceless, whispering in low, guttural tones. They surrounded the dining hall, their hollow heads tilting toward her. Madeline's pulse hammered. She tore at the clasp, nails breaking, but the necklace refused to budge. The stone throbbed like a second heart, syncing with her own. "What are they?" she gasped. Carlyle smiled, spreading his arms. "My darlings, those who wore the stone before you. They wanted wealth, desire, freedom. They got it, for a time, until the hunger came due." The shadows leaned closer, their whispers rising in a chorus. "Join us, join us." Madeline's knees weakened. "I don't want this." Carlyle moved faster than a man should, standing suddenly inches from her. He cupped her chin in one cold hand, his face both beautiful and monstrous under the red light. His teeth, sharp and glistening, flashed in a smile. "You asked for a sugar daddy, Madeline," he whispered, voice low and darkly playful. "But sugar always rots, and everything sweet belongs to me." The necklace flared bright crimson, flooding her body with unbearable heat. She screamed, the sound swallowed by the chanting shadows. Her skin shimmered, then dissolved into smoke, pulled screaming into the stone. When the glow dimmed, only Carlyle remained in the silent hall. He plucked the necklace from the air, now pulsing faintly as though satisfied. With a smirk, he tucked it back into the velvet box. Somewhere in the distance, a phone buzzed on the marble table, another new message from the dating app. Another young woman, curious and eager, waiting for him. Carlyle's grin widened. On to the next arrangement. The shadows hissed approval as the mansion's lights went out. The desert highway stretched endlessly under the pale glow of the moon. Rachel Myers, 26, drove with her knuckles tight on the wheel, headlights carving tunnels through the dust. Her car's gas gauge blinked red, and the last sign she had passed read, Silver Pines Motel, 1 mile ahead. She almost laughed. She hadn't seen another soul for hours, and the idea of a motel out here felt like a cruel joke. But when the flickering neon appeared on the horizon, her chest loosened. The motel was a squat, L-shaped building, its paint peeling, its sign buzzing faintly. Silver PNS Motel. Letters missing, barely alive. The parking lot was empty, save for a single rusted pickup. Rachel parked and stepped out, the desert wind cutting through her jacket. She pushed open the office door. A bell jingled overhead, the sound unnaturally sharp in the silence. Behind the desk sat an elderly woman with stringy gray hair, her smile too wide, her skin stretched thin. A brass nameplate read, Clara. "Room for one?" Clara's voice rasped. Rachel nodded. "Just for the night. My car's almost out of gas." Clara slid a heavy brass key across the counter. "Room 6, end of the hall." Rachel took the key, her hand brushing Clara's for a moment. The woman's skin was ice cold, almost clammy. She suppressed a shiver. As Rachel wheeled her small suitcase down the hall, she noticed the rooms were all numbered in uneven, hand-painted digits. The carpet was damp beneath her shoes, though the air was dry. When she reached room 6, she unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of mildew and something metallic. The wallpaper peeled in long strips, and the bedspread was an ugly shade of orange-brown. She tossed her bag down and collapsed onto the bed. That was when she noticed it. On the far wall, just above the dresser, hung a large mirror, and in it her reflection wasn't moving. Rachel sat up slowly, her pulse thudding. In the glass, her reflection was still lying down. Its eyes opened, staring directly at her. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She blinked hard, rubbed her eyes, then looked again. Her reflection still hadn't moved. It lay in the bed, staring back at her with hollow, unblinking eyes. Slowly, very slowly, the reflection sat up. Rachel froze. She hadn't moved an inch, yet in the mirror, she tilted her head to the side, lips curling into a thin, crooked smile. Rachel stumbled back, nearly tripping over her suitcase. "What the hell?" she whispered. The reflection's lips moved in perfect silence. Words she couldn't hear, but the shape of them was unmistakable. "You shouldn't be here." Rachel bolted forward and yanked the curtains shut, blocking the faint moonlight spilling in. But when she turned back, the mirror was darker now, its surface rippling faintly like water. Her reflection leaned closer, pressing its palms against the glass as though it were trying to push through. A loud knock rattled the door. Rachel jumped, her heart slamming. "Housekeeping," a voice called. She frowned. It was midnight. Who did housekeeping at this hour? The knocking grew louder, more insistent. "Housekeeping, room 6, let me in." Rachel backed away from the door, shaking her head. No, I didn't call anyone." The mirror rippled again. Her reflection pressed its face against the glass, whispering soundlessly, "Don't open it." The door handle rattled violently, metal clanging against the frame. The voice outside grew deeper, distorted. "Let me in." Rachel pressed herself against the far wall, trembling. She couldn't take her eyes off the mirror. Her reflection was still smiling. Only now blood began to leak from its mouth, trailing down its chin in thick black rivulets. Rachel pressed both hands over her ears as if that could shut out the pounding at the door. The sound grew heavier, the wood groaning as though something massive pressed against it. Her reflection never looked away. It tilted its head slowly, then raised a trembling finger to point, straight at the door. Rachel shook her head. No. No, I won't. The lights flickered. For an instant, the mirror's surface went black, and when it cleared, her reflection was gone. The silence that followed was worse than the knocking. Rachel took a cautious step forward. Her reflection should have reappeared, but the glass was empty. Then, a whisper, soft, right behind her ear. "I'm here." Rachel spun, her scream catching in her throat. The reflection stood not inside the mirror but in the room itself, pale and trembling, eyes black pits. It moved with jerks and stutters, like a broken film reel. Blood still trickled from its mouth, staining its chin, yet its grin never faltered. The knocking on the door stopped. Rachel pressed herself against the dresser, eyes darting between the figure and the exit. She didn't dare touch the door. She didn't dare look away from the thing that wore her face. The doppelganger took a single step forward. The carpet beneath its bare feet darkened, as if water, or blood, was seeping upward from below. It whispered, lips curling wider. "One of us has to stay." Rachel's knees buckled. "Stay? Stay where? What are you talking about?" The thing tilted its head, unnervingly calm. "In the glass. Someone always stays." The mirror's surface rippled again, glowing faintly. Shapes moved within it. Other figures, countless, pressed against the glass, their faces twisted in silent screams. Rachel's chest heaved as the mirror pulsed with light, the figures inside clawing soundlessly against the glass. Their eyes were hollow, their mouths frozen in eternal screams. Her doppelganger moved closer, its cold breath grazing her cheek. "One of us stays," it repeated, voice broken like two people speaking at once. Rachel backed into the dresser, shaking her head. "I'm not going in there. I'm not." The figure's smile stretched too wide, splitting at the corners until blood dripped down its neck. It seized her wrists with ice-cold hands and shoved her toward the mirror. The glass rippled like water. Rachel felt it pulling at her skin, tugging her hair, the cold seeping into her bones. "No! No!" she screamed, thrashing. Her hands clawed at the edges of the frame, nails tearing, but the pull was relentless. The faces inside pressed harder against the surface, desperate, eager, waiting for her to join them. Then, just as her face brushed the glass, her doppelganger yanked her back. Rachel stumbled to the floor, gasping for air. It crouched above her, tilting its head, black eyes unblinking. "You don't understand," it whispered. "If you don't take my place, I'll take yours." The mirror flared. A dozen pale arms shot outward, seizing the doppelganger and dragging it screaming into the glass. The reflection's nails carved bloody streaks across the floor as it was pulled inside. Then, silence. Rachel sat shaking on the damp carpet. The mirror showed her reflection again, normal, breathing. But as she leaned closer, she saw it, just for a split second. Her reflection blinked out of sync, one heartbeat too late. The smile that spread across its lips was not her own. Evelyn Monroe tightened her scarf against the biting wind as she trudged up the snow-covered path toward the lodge. The storm had arrived faster than predicted, and the last bus to the nearest town had long departed. Each step sank deep into the powdery snow, and the icy gusts whipped against her face, numbing her cheeks and ears. The mountain felt impossibly vast, silent, except for the howl of the wind, and with every step, a growing sense of isolation settled into her chest. The lodge's windows glowed faintly through the blizzard, a beacon of warmth in the desolate landscape. Evelyn had dreamed of this retreat for months, a chance to escape the city, the constant noise, and finally finish her novel in peace. Yet as she approached, a cold unease gnawed at her, the kind of instinctive dread that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. The heavy wooden door creaked as she pushed it open, and a gust of warm, pine-scented air hit her face. The interior seemed welcoming at first glance, a grand fireplace with logs smoldering, old leather armchairs arranged neatly around it, and a thick plush rug covering the worn floorboards. But the stillness was unnerving. No staff, no other guests, not even the faintest sound beyond the occasional crackle of the fire. She set her bag down and surveyed the room more carefully. The furniture was elegant but aged, coated in a fine layer of dust. On a small table near the fireplace, a single envelope rested, stark against the dark wood. It was sealed in wax, marked simply, "Welcome, Evelyn. Make yourself comfortable." Her pulse quickened as she picked it up. She had not expected a note, and the wax seal seemed oddly deliberate, almost ceremonial. Breaking it, she unfolded the thick paper inside. The message was brief, but every word sent a chill down her spine. "Do not leave." Evelyn's eyes darted around the room, half expecting someone to step out from the shadows. The wind outside howled, rattling the windows in their frames, and a sense of claustrophobic dread settled over her. A lodge this isolated, especially in a storm like this, should feel like a sanctuary. But something about the note made her stomach twist. She moved toward the staircase to check the guest rooms, but a faint creak from above froze her in place. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoing softly against the wooden floorboards. She knew she was alone, or at least she had thought she was. Her flashlight trembled in her hand, illuminating dust motes in the air like tiny stars caught in a storm. Evelyn took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "It's just the wind. Just the wind." And yet, even as she tried to convince herself, the feeling lingered. She was not alone. Something, or someone, was already waiting for her. Evelyn's hands shook as she climbed the creaking staircase, each step groaning under her weight. The lodge seemed alive in the storm. The wind outside rattled the windows, and somewhere deep within, a soft thumping echoed, like footsteps in rhythm with her own heartbeat. The corridor upstairs was dimly lit by flickering wall sconces, their light casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to twist and shift with a mind of their own. Doors lined the hall, each one slightly ajar, revealing rooms that appeared pristine yet unnervingly empty. On a dresser in one room, a photograph lay face down. Evelyn's curiosity overcame her hesitation, and she picked it up. It was a black and white image of herself, standing in this very lodge wearing the same clothes, looking frightened. But the date at the bottom read, December 14th, 1978. Her breath caught. That was over 40 years ago. A sudden bang from the far end of the corridor made her jump. The door at the end swung open slowly on its own, and a shadow passed across the threshold. Evelyn's pulse raced. She forced herself to take a step forward, then another, her flashlight cutting a narrow path through the darkness. The room she entered was small, with peeling wallpaper and a single bed covered in a tattered quilt. But it wasn't empty. On the bed sat a figure, hunched, its face hidden beneath a hood. The moment Evelyn stepped closer, it turned its head, revealing a pale, featureless face, skin smooth and white, eyes voids of darkness. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The figure did not answer. It rose slowly, unnaturally tall, limbs bending at impossible angles, and moved toward her with deliberate precision. Evelyn stumbled backward, tripping over the bedpost. Her flashlight skidded across the floor, illuminating dozens of other shadowy shapes crouched in corners, pressed against the walls, watching her with blank, hollow faces. A cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the flickering lights upstairs, leaving only the pale glow of her flashlight. The whispers began then, low at first, barely audible. "Stay. Forever. Stay." Evelyn scrambled toward the staircase, desperate to retreat, but the corridor had changed. The walls stretched impossibly, doors shifted out of reach, and the lodge seemed to stretch endlessly into darkness. Her mind raced. The storm outside wasn't the only thing keeping her trapped. Something in the lodge wanted her to stay, to join the shadows that had been waiting for decades. Evelyn pressed herself against the wall, gasping for breath, her flashlight trembling in her hand. The shadowy figures moved closer, gliding silently, their hollow voids of faces fixed on her every twitch, every terrified movement. The whispers had grown into a chorus, overlapping, urgent, incomprehensible, yet terrifyingly insistent. You cannot leave. You belong here." She darted toward the staircase, but it had changed. The steps stretched unnaturally, rising higher than they should have, and the banister twisted like the gnarled branches of dead trees. Her foot caught, and she tumbled down a few steps, scraping her palms and knees on the splintered wood. The shadows followed, climbing over one another, pushing and sliding without sound. Evelyn's flashlight flickered, and in its brief glow she caught glimpses of the walls. Hundreds of small, claw-like handprints pressed into the wood, frozen in mid-grip, as if someone had tried to claw their way out, and failed. From the far end of the hallway, a door slammed shut. Evelyn whirled, heart pounding. A figure emerged from the darkness, tall, thin, with arms that bent backward at impossible angles. Its featureless face tilted, and even though it had no mouth, a whispering voice echoed in her mind. "Join us. Become one of us." Evelyn backed into a corner, the shadows closing in from every side. Her flashlight caught on an old mirror hanging crookedly on the wall. For a moment she thought she saw herself, until the reflection grinned back at her, wide and unnatural, eyes black voids, stretching her own expression into a grotesque mask. Panic surged. She grabbed a nearby chair, swinging it at the nearest shadow. It passed through harmlessly, dissipating into smoke before reforming behind her. The lodge itself seemed to pulse, walls shifting, floors bending under the weight of unseen things. A sudden, deafening crack echoed through the building as the chandelier above the main hall fell, splintering into pieces that scattered across the floor. Evelyn's mind screamed at her to run, but every path she took led her deeper into the darkness, the shadows relentless, feeding off her terror. She realized with a sickening clarity, the lodge didn't just trap people, it consumed them, twisted them into shadows and added them to its ever-growing collection. And now, it wanted her too. The shadows surged forward, closing in on Evelyn from every angle. Her flashlight flickered violently, the beam catching hundreds of featureless faces pressed into the walls, their hollow eyes staring, mouths silently screaming. The whispers had become a deafening chorus echoing in her skull. "You are ours. Forever." Evelyn backed into the fireplace, desperation clawing at her chest. The logs inside glowed faintly, as if alive, casting grotesque, writhing shadows across the floor. She grabbed one and swung it at a shadow, but it passed through harmlessly, dissipating into smoke that immediately reformed behind her. The walls of the lodge rippled and twisted, the ceiling stretching impossibly high. The hallway she had come from was gone, replaced by an endless void of darkness. Every exit she tried to reach dissolved into more shadows, reaching, pressing, consuming. From the corner, the featureless figure advanced, its limbs bending in ways no human body should, tilting its head in that same unnatural way. Evelyn stumbled backward, falling to the floor, and the flashlight skidded away, illuminating a mirror that hadn't been there before. Her reflection stared back, but it was no longer her. Its eyes were black voids, its mouth stretched into a frozen, grotesque grin. The shadows converged, pulling her toward the mirror. She screamed as the cold, invisible hands dragged her closer, her body feeling like it was being pulled apart and reassembled at the same time. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her completely was her reflection smiling back from the glass, eyes hollow and mocking, whispering, "Welcome home, Evelyn. You belong here now." The lodge fell silent again, the storm outside raging on. On a nearby table, the fireplace logs glowed softly, and a crooked mirror reflected a new, terrified face trapped forever within. Miles Carter stepped cautiously onto the cracked asphalt of the abandoned carnival. The Ferris wheel loomed over him like a skeletal giant, its rusted metal groaning softly in the night breeze. Torn banners flapped weakly, whispering against the wind, and the faint smell of burnt sugar and stale popcorn hung in the air, as if the carnival had never truly closed. Shadows from the skeletal rides stretched unnaturally across the broken pavement, twisting in the weak beam of his flashlight. He had come with a simple goal: explore, document, and maybe catch some rare shots for his photography blog. Urban legends about the carnival being cursed, about performers who never left, didn't bother him. He didn't believe in ghosts. At least that's what he told himself as the wind tugged at his jacket and sent a shiver crawling down his spine. The main entrance gate hung loosely on its hinges, squealing sharply when he pushed it open. Beyond it, the midway stretched into darkness littered with toppled stalls and rusted rides. Miles clicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting a narrow path through the shadows, revealing carnival games half decayed, their prizes hanging from hooks like the blank eyes of long-forgotten children. Broken mirrors from the funhouse reflected his own anxious face in fragmented pieces, warped and twisted. A sudden creak from the Ferris wheel made him jump. The wheel was stationary, long abandoned, yet one gondola swayed gently, though no wind should have moved it. Miles froze, straining to hear above the sound of his own heartbeat. Somewhere, faint and almost imperceptible, came the echo of a child's laughter, but distant, hollow, and dripping with menace. He moved toward the ticket booth, careful not to step on the debris scattered along the walkway. The graffiti covering its surface was old, peeling, but one particular message caught his eye. The show never ends. On the counter lay a small, hand-painted card. Welcome, Miles. The show has already begun. His pulse quickened. He hadn't left any of his personal items here, and no one had been expecting him. The air seemed thicker now, tinged with a metallic scent like rusted blood. From somewhere deep in the carnival, he heard a faint tune, like a music box playing out of rhythm. He spun toward the sound, flashlight trembling in his hand. The midway stretched endlessly into darkness, shadows flickering and shifting as if the carnival itself were alive, watching him, waiting. Miles swallowed hard. His rational mind urged him to leave, but curiosity, and something darker, something ancient, Miles stepped cautiously along the midway, the uneven ground crunching beneath his boots. The music box melody grew louder, discordant and warped, seeming to come from everywhere at once. Torn tents swayed in the wind, their fabric stretching like ghostly faces screaming silently. Shadows moved unnaturally, flickering in the corners of his vision, disappearing whenever he turned to face them. A carousel appeared ahead, rusted and broken, yet the horses seemed to sway as if caught mid-gallop. Miles' flashlight illuminated one horse, its paint chipped and eyes hollow. But for a brief moment, it felt as if it had turned its gaze directly on him. He shivered and stepped back, bumping into a stall that toppled over, spilling old plush toys onto the ground. Their button eyes glinted in the flashlight, unnervingly lifelike. From behind him, a low, scraping sound echoed. He spun around, nothing, but the air felt charged, heavy, as though the carnival itself was breathing around him. The music box now played faster, more frenzied, accompanied by faint whispers that seemed to come from the shadows. Stay. Join us. The show must go on. Miles stumbled toward the funhouse, its doors hanging ajar. Inside, mirrors reflected fragmented images of himself, twisted and elongated, some grinning back with wide, unnatural smiles. He raised his flashlight and tried to back away, but the mirrors seemed endless, stretching the corridor into impossible depths. A sudden cold gust slammed the funhouse door shut behind him. Darkness pressed in from all sides. The whispering voices multiplied, echoing off the walls. Then, from a corner of his eye, he saw movement. Shadowy figures, hunched and twisting, slinking along the walls, advancing silently toward him. Panicked, Miles ran, turning corners only to find the corridors looping back into themselves. The carnival was no longer a place he could escape. It had become a labyrinth, alive and malevolent, feeding off his fear. He realized then that the legends were true. The carnival didn't just haunt, it trapped and it collected. Every step he took, every glance, every heartbeat, drew him deeper into its twisted, his flashlight cutting through the inky darkness of the funhouse corridors. Every mirror reflected not just him, but dozens of distorted versions, Faces stretched impossibly wide, grins too big, eyes hollow and black. He stumbled backward, and one of the reflections seemed to lunge toward him, its hand pressing against the glass as if trying to escape. A sudden clatter echoed from above, and the funhouse ceiling seemed to groan under the weight of something unseen. The music box melody had grown faster, erratic, accompanied now by distant, distorted laughter. Children, adults, performers, all blending into one terrifying chorus. He tried to retrace his steps, but the mirrors twisted the halls, bending space so that every corridor led him deeper inside. Shadowy figures emerged from the corners, hunched and elongated, their movements jerky, yet deliberate. They made no sound, yet Miles felt their presence closing in, pressing against him, suffocating. From the center of the funhouse came a soft, almost hypnotic voice. "The show is not complete until you perform." Panic surged through him. He ran blindly into a room, tripping over discarded carnival props, broken juggling pins, cracked masks, and tattered costumes. When he looked up, the shadows were all around him, dozens of faceless performers advancing silently. Each one mimicked his movements, twisting and tilting unnaturally, reflecting his own fear back at him in grotesque ways. He realized the carnival wasn't just haunted, it was sentient. It reshaped itself, fed on fear, and trapped those who dared enter into its never-ending performance. The mirrors, the shadows, the laughter, they were all part of it. Miles's breath came in ragged gasps. He turned to flee, but the exit had vanished. The Ferris wheel outside loomed larger than before, its gondolas swaying slowly, eerily, like skeletal arms reaching for him. Every attempt to escape only led him back to the funhouse, to the center of the carnival's malevolent heart. He understood the horrifying truth. The carnival didn't let anyone leave, and now it wanted him to join its eternal twisted panic reached a fever pitch as the shadowy figures closed in. The mirrors around him now reflected hundreds of versions of himself, each one grinning grotesquely, eyes hollow, mouths stretching impossibly wide. The distorted music box tune reverberated through the funhouse faster, louder, filling every corner with an almost tangible malice. He stumbled backward, crashing into a stack of old masks. One flew into his face, and for a brief instant, he saw not just a mask but a reflection of himself. Twisted, lifeless, trapped behind its empty eyes. The shadows surged forward, limbs bending unnaturally, pressing closer, whispering in voices that were not quite human. Perform, or remain. Forever. Miles clawed at the funhouse walls, but they pulsed under his touch, like living flesh. The corridor twisted and warped, looping endlessly, leading him back to the same central room over and over. The Ferris wheel outside rattled violently, metal screeching as if echoing the carnival's hunger. A figure emerged from the largest mirror in the room. A tall, faceless performer, its head tilting unnaturally, arms bending in ways no human body could. It raised a hand, pointing directly at him. Miles screamed, swinging the masks and props in a desperate attempt to fend it off, but they passed through harmlessly, dissipating into smoke that immediately reformed behind him. Suddenly, the mirrors rippled like water. Miles felt himself being pulled toward them, a cold, invisible force dragging him closer to the glass. His reflection grinned wider, eyes black voids, lips stretching impossibly. He struggled, but the shadows surged, engulfing him completely. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was his own face in the mirror, twisted in eternal terror, whispering, "Welcome to the show, Miles. You are ours now." Outside, the carnival lay silent under the moonlight. The Ferris wheel creaked gently in the wind, the funhouse windows dark and empty. On the midway, a single mask rested on the cracked asphalt, and if one looked closely, the faint outline of a terrified face could be seen, trapped forever inside. Dr. Lena Mitchell pushed open the rusted gate of the old Blackwood Hospital. Years of abandonment had left the building crawling with ivy and grime, its windows shattered, revealing dark, empty halls beyond. She adjusted her flashlight and stepped inside. The smell hit her first, a mix of mold, antiseptic, and something faintly metallic, like blood long dried. Her boots echoed against the cracked linoleum floors, every step bouncing off the walls. Lena had heard the rumors. Patients trapped after the hospital shut down, strange sightings by urban explorers, whispers of doctors who never left. She was skeptical. Science didn't believe in ghosts. Her flashlight flickered as she moved deeper into the building. Old wheelchairs sat in corridors, their wheels rusted to immobility. Examination tables were toppled, and peeling charts littered the floor. One chart, still somewhat legible, bore the name Samuel Crane, 1983. A faint sound made her freeze, a rhythmic tapping like fingers drumming on a metal surface. She followed it to the operating wing. The door, once pristine white, hung on one hinge. Inside, the room was dark, but Lena's flashlight caught something odd. The surgical table was set perfectly, instruments aligned in gleaming rows. Yet in the center of the table, a single operating mask rested, its straps curled as if recently worn. A whisper echoed from the shadows. "We're still here." Lena's hand tightened around the flashlight as she stepped closer to the surgical table. The metallic instruments glinted under the beam, unnervingly clean despite decades of neglect. The mask seemed to pulse faintly, almost as if it were breathing. A sudden clatter from the corridor made her spin around. An old IV stand had toppled over, its wheels squealing against the cracked tiles. The tapping sound returned, louder now, echoing through the empty hallways. She followed the noise down a long, narrow corridor lined with patient rooms. Doors hung askew, and every window was either shattered or blackened with soot. Yet in each room, shadows seemed to shift unnaturally, curling toward her, as if they had life of their own. One door at the far end was different. It bore a faded sign. Isolation. Authorized personnel only. A cold draft seeped through the crack beneath it, carrying with it a faint, sickly sweet smell that made Lena gag. She hesitated, then pushed the door open. The room was pitch black, but as she raised her flashlight, the beam landed on a figure standing in the corner. Its hospital gown hung in tatters, face obscured by shadow. "Lena!" A voice rasped from the figure, sending chills down her spine. The lights on the ceiling flickered and died. In the sudden darkness, Lena felt something brush against her arm. She whipped around. Nothing was there, but the whisper came again, closer, insistent. "Stay with us." The temperature dropped sharply, and condensation formed on her flashlight lens. Lena's breath came in short gasps as the shadowy figure advanced, its footsteps silent on the cracked floor. The old hospital was no longer abandoned. It was alive. Lena stumbled backward, heart hammering as the shadowy figure glided closer. Its gown hung in tatters, but its movements were unnervingly smooth, almost unnatural. The whispers multiplied, echoing through the hall, overlapping in discordant tones. She turned to run, but the corridor stretched endlessly, doors and walls warping in ways that defied logic. Every exit she tried led her back to the same isolation room, as if the building itself were reshaping around her. Her flashlight flickered again and the figure was closer, its face still hidden in shadow. Lena's pulse raced as she noticed something chilling. The walls were now lined with patient charts, each name crossed out in thick black ink. At the bottom of one, she recognized a familiar name from the ledger near the surgical table. Samuel Crane, 1983. The whispers grew louder, now forming words she could understand. "Join us. Never leave." Lena's legs gave way beneath her. She fell to the floor, crawling toward the door in a desperate bid to escape. As she reached the handle, the shadowy figure raised a hand, and the room temperature plunged further. Frost formed on the walls and floor, spreading rapidly toward her. From the corner, a low, guttural sound emanated, like someone breathing underwater, distorted and unnatural. The figure's form seemed to split, multiplying into dozens of indistinct shapes that reached for her. Lena screamed, her voice swallowed by the chorus of whispers. The isolation room had become a trap, and the shadows of the hospital were hungry. Every attempt to flee seemed to feed them, making them stronger, more solid. She realized in terror that the hospital did not just haunt, it consumed. The shadowy forms closed in, their whispering voices now a deafening roar in Lena's ears. She scrambled backward, hitting the cold metal surgical table. The mask on it seemed to twitch, as if alive, reflecting her own terrified face, but warped, smiling, eyes hollow. Lena's flashlight flickered violently, casting long, grotesque shadows that merged with the moving shapes around her. She tried to scream, but her voice was swallowed by the chorus of whispers. "You belong to us. Forever." The temperature dropped further, frost spreading over her clothes and skin. Lena clawed at the door, trying to pry it open, but the handle twisted uselessly in her hand. The walls of the isolation room pulsed and shifted, like the hospital itself was breathing, alive and hungry. From the corner, the figure advanced, splitting into dozens of shadowed forms, each moving with predatory precision. Lena stumbled toward the surgical table, lifting the mask in a desperate act. The instant her fingers touched it, a piercing, silent scream echoed in her mind, and she felt herself being pulled, dragged into the mirror-like surface of the mask. The shadows surged, swallowing her body whole. Her eyes widened as she saw her own face reflected in dozens of surfaces, mirrors, instruments, even the frost on the windows. The hospital had claimed her. When the fire escape ladder outside the hospital finally rattled in the wind, it revealed an empty building. No lights, no movement, no trace of Lena Mitchell. Inside, the surgical mask lay on the table, perfectly still, but if one looked closely, the faint outline of a terrified face could be seen, trapped forever behind its glassy surface. A soft, collective whisper filled the empty hall. "Welcome to Blackwood. You are home now." Eli Harper's boots crunched against the thick blanket of fresh snow as he trudged up the forest path. The wind howled through the skeletal pines, tugging at the edges of his hood. The cabin appeared ahead, a lonely silhouette against the white expanse, smoke curling faintly from its chimney. Eli hadn't been here in years, not since the rumors started. Locals whispered about the Harper cabin, how anyone who stayed overnight during the first snowfall never seemed quite the same afterward. But Eli had his reasons. He needed solitude, a chance to write, and the winter had kept everyone else away, or so he hoped. The wooden door groaned as he pushed it open. Inside, the cabin smelled of cold pine and something faintly metallic. Dust coated the furniture, but the fireplace had logs arranged neatly, as if someone expected him. He dropped his bag and knelt, striking a match. The fire caught, casting long shadows that stretched and twisted across the walls. The shadows seemed wrong. Eli shook his head. "Just my imagination," he muttered. As he unpacked, a soft tapping echoed from the loft above, a rhythmic knock, like fingernails tracing the wooden railing. Eli froze, straining to hear over the crackle of the fire. Tap, tap, tap. He told himself it was the wind, or maybe a loose shutter. Yet as he climbed the narrow stairs to check, he could swear he heard a whisper, just barely audible. "Don't look up." Eli's hand trembled as he reached the top of the loft stairs. The tapping had stopped, replaced by a low, almost imperceptible creaking, like something, or someone, was shifting in the darkness. He grabbed a flashlight from his bag, its beam cutting a narrow path through the loft. The floorboards were dusty, but his footfalls sounded hollow, echoing too loudly in the silent cabin. On the far wall, a large old mirror leaned at an angle, cracked across the center. Eli's reflection stared back, but it wasn't quite right. His eyes seemed darker, the corners of his mouth twitching into a smile he didn't remember making. A sudden gust of wind slammed the loft window shut. The mirror's reflection warped, rippling like water. From it, a pale figure emerged, motionless at first, then slowly stepping forward, eyes locked on Eli. "Who's there?" Eli demanded, voice shaking. No answer, just the sound of soft scratching, like fingernails across wood, coming from the loft railing behind him. Eli spun around, flashlight catching the shadow of a small, hunched figure at the top of the stairs, face hidden beneath a tangle of matted hair. The mirror figure tilted its head, mirroring Eli's movements perfectly, inching closer as if trying to merge with him. Eli's pulse raced. Every instinct screamed to run, yet his feet felt glued to the dusty floor. The scratching grew louder, now accompanied by a whisper that seemed to come from all directions. "Stay. Forever. With us." Eli backed away, tripping over a loose board, and the mirror figure lunged, not moving from the glass, yet somehow closer, its mouth opening wider than physically possible, forming a silent scream that chilled Eli to the bone. He bolted down the loft stairs, crashing into the main room. The fireplace flickered violently, throwing shadows that now resembled dozens of twisted faces leering at him. The cabin was alive with murmurs, whispers, and the creak of invisible footsteps. Eli's breath came in ragged gasps. The door, his only escape, was gone, replaced by a black void where the entrance had been. Eli spun in the empty space where the door had been, panic clawing at his chest. The shadows in the room deepened, thickening until they seemed almost tangible, pressing in on him from every side. The mirror in the loft, now visible from below, rippled like a dark pond. The pale figure inside moved independently, grinning wider, tilting its head as though mocking him. Eli's own reflection began to twist, eyes sinking into black voids, mouth stretching into a frozen scream. A soft, chilling laughter echoed through the cabin. "You shouldn't have come back," it hissed, voice fragmented as if multiple voices spoke at once. Eli stumbled toward the fireplace, desperate to grab something to defend himself. The logs weren't wood. They were bones, stacked neatly, with faint carvings etched into the surface. A metallic scent filled his nostrils, thick and coppery. The whispering grew louder. "Join us. Stay with us. Forever." From the corners of the room, shadowy forms began to emerge. Humanoid, but elongated, faceless, their limbs bending in impossible angles. They reached for him with slow, deliberate movements, gliding across the floor without making a sound. Eli screamed, turning toward the loft stairs. The mirror's figure now pressed its hands against the glass from the inside, cracking it further. Every crack emitted a faint, high-pitched shriek. In a final, desperate move, Eli leaped onto the table, smashing a heavy candlestick against the nearest shadow. It dissolved into smoke with a shriek, but more immediately formed behind him. The cabin itself seemed to breathe, walls pulsing, floors groaning. Eli realized with a cold horror that the cabin wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and it wanted him. The shadowy forms closed in, gliding silently over the warped floorboards. Eli's back hit the wall, and he realized there was nowhere left to run. The fireplace logs, still carved with strange symbols, glowed faintly, casting eerie shadows that danced across the room like living creatures. The mirror from the loft rippled violently. The pale figure inside pressed through, its hands cracking the glass further. Eli tried to look away, but his reflection in the shards seemed to move on its own, mouth opening wider than possible, whispering, "You belong here now." A sudden cold wind slammed into him from nowhere, knocking him to the floor. The whispering grew into a chorus of voices, chanting in a language he didn't know, surrounding him, filling every corner of the cabin. Eli crawled toward the fireplace, desperate, and grabbed one of the bone logs. As he swung it at a shadowy figure, it passed through him, leaving a cold sting, and the figure dissolved into smoke that immediately reformed behind him. The floor beneath him began to ripple like water. The walls pulsed with the shadows of faces screaming silently. Every exit, every window, every door vanished. Eli screamed, swinging blindly, but the shadows surged, pulling him toward the mirror. The pale figure reached for him, and for the first time, Eli realized the truth. The cabin didn't just trap people, it consumed them, weaving their essence into its walls, into its mirrors, into its shadows. The last thing Eli saw before the darkness swallowed him completely was his own reflection smiling, eyes black and hollow, mouth stretching impossibly wide. Then he was gone. The cabin was silent once more. The fireplace flickered, casting shadows that seemed to watch the empty room. On the mantel lay a single, cracked mirror shard, reflecting a new, terrified face. A soft whisper filled the air. "Welcome home." Rain hammered down on the cracked pavement as Julian Cross tightened his hood and hurried through the dimly lit street. His phone's GPS blinked faintly, the screen smeared with raindrops. The app kept repeating, "Destination ahead, 200 feet." But when Julian looked up, the building didn't look like the sleek Airbnb listing he had booked. Instead, a towering apartment block loomed over him, windows shattered, its brick walls blackened with soot as if it had been abandoned after a fire decades ago. "This can't be right," Julian muttered. He tapped the screen again, zooming in. The pin pulsed exactly where he stood. A voice echoed faintly from the lobby. "Checking in?" Julian froze. A woman stood behind the front desk inside the ruined building, her hair pinned neatly in a bun, her clothes oddly out of time, a pressed gray dress, her lipstick a dark maroon shade. She didn't look wet despite the storm outside. Hesitant but cold, Julian stepped in. The moment he crossed the threshold, the sound of rain vanished. The air smelled of bleach and something sweet, like overripe fruit. The receptionist slid an old-fashioned leather-bound ledger toward him. "Name?" Julian's chest tightened. "Cross. Julian Cross." Her pen scratched slowly across the page, but when he leaned over to peek, the ledger already had names, hundreds of them. Some crossed out with thick, angry strokes, others smudged as if erased by fire or water. The woman handed him a brass key. "Room 313. Julian glanced at the stairwell, where the numbers on the doors climbed higher into darkness. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and when he pulled it out, a notification appeared that made his skin crawl. "Welcome back, Julian. Enjoy your stay." His hands shook. He had never been here before. Julian's footsteps echoed as he climbed the winding stairwell, the brass key warm in his palm. The building felt wrong. Too quiet. No creak of pipes, no hum of electricity, not even the faint drip of water you'd expect in a place so ruined. Just silence. By the time he reached the third floor, his pulse was thundering in his ears. The hallway stretched endlessly, walls lined with peeling wallpaper patterned in faded roses. Every few feet, a door sat crooked in its frame, numbered in tarnished brass. 309, 310, 311. As Julian passed 312, he stopped. The door was cracked open, and through the gap he could see the glow of a television flickering in a room. The static buzz filled the hallway. "Hello?" he called, his voice trembling. The TV snapped off instantly. The door swung wider, revealing a perfectly furnished hotel room. Clean sheets tucked neatly, a glass of water on the nightstand, a suitcase sitting by the bed as though someone had just checked in. Julian took a step closer. The suitcase had a tag dangling from its handle. His breath caught when he read it. Cross. J. Before he could move, the door slammed shut, nearly catching his hand. His key slipped from his grip, clattering to the floor. Heart pounding, he snatched it up and stumbled down the hall. Finally, he reached room 313. The key fit perfectly, the lock clicking softly. Inside, the room was pitch black until the overhead light flickered on. At first glance, it looked ordinary. A made bed, a desk, heavy curtains drawn tight. But then Julian noticed the mirror above the dresser. His reflection was smiling. He wasn't. Julian stumbled backward, his hand hitting the wall. The reflection didn't follow. It just stood there, grinning, teeth a shade too sharp, eyes too wide. "Stop it," Julian whispered, more to himself than to the glass. His reflection tilted its head, slow and deliberate, like it was studying him. Then its lips moved. No sound came, but the words were unmistakable. "You already checked in." Julian's throat went dry. He yanked the curtains open, hoping for city lights, traffic, anything. Instead, the window revealed a black void. No streets, no buildings, not even the storm. Just endless darkness pressing against the glass. His phone buzzed again. A new message lit the screen. "Don't leave the room after midnight." Julian's gaze darted to the clock on the nightstand. 11:54 p.m. 6 minutes. A sudden knock rattled the door. 3 sharp raps, then silence. Julian froze, his stomach twisting. Another knock. This time, slower, heavy. The kind of knock that sounded like it came from someone who already knew you'd answer. "Room service," a voice crooned from the hall. But the tone was off, drawn out, sing-song, mocking. Julian's knees nearly buckled. He didn't order anything. The doorknob started to turn. End of part 3. Want me to finish the story with part 4? Julian stumbled backward, his hand hitting the wall. The reflection didn't follow. It just stood there, grinning, teeth a shade too sharp, eyes too wide. "Stop it," Julian whispered, more to himself than to the glass. His reflection tilted its head, slow and deliberate, like it was studying him. Then its lips moved. No sound came, but the words were unmistakable. "You already checked in." Julian's throat went dry. He yanked the curtains open, hoping for city lights, traffic, anything. Instead, the window revealed a black void. No streets, no buildings, not even the storm. Just endless darkness pressing against the glass. His phone buzzed again. A new message lit the screen. "Don't leave the room after midnight." Julian's gaze darted to the clock on the nightstand. 11:54 p.m. 6 minutes. A sudden knock rattled the door. 3 sharp raps, then silence. Julian froze, his stomach twisting. Another knock. This time, slower, heavy. The kind of knock that sounded like it came from someone who already knew you'd answer. "Room service," a voice crooned from the hall. But the tone was off, drawn out, sing-song, mocking. Julian's knees nearly buckled. He didn't order anything. The doorknob started to turn. Here's part 4, the conclusion of the story. The knob rattled harder, twisting against the lock. Julian shoved a chair under the handle, his breath shallow, sweat dripping down his neck. "Go away," he croaked. The voice outside chuckled low and guttural, as though several throats laughed at once. "Julian Cross, room 313 always belongs to you." The mirror across the room shimmered, the reflection no longer confined. His grinning double stepped forward, pressing against the inside of the glass like it was thin plastic. Cracks spiderwebbed across the surface with each push. Julian backed toward the corner, trapped between the door and the mirror. His phone buzzed again in his hand. This time, no words, just an image. A photograph of him, asleep in this very bed. The clock struck midnight. The chair holding the door shuddered violently. The mirror exploded outward, shards raining onto the carpet. From the glass, his reflection pulled itself free. Identical but wrong. The skin slightly off color. The smile stretched wider than any human face could manage. It reached for him. Julian screamed and lunged for the door, but the lock turned from the inside. The chair scraped away on its own. The door creaked open to a hallway that no longer looked like roses and peeling wallpaper. Now it was charred black, the carpet soaked as if with old blood. Dozens of figures stood there, pale, hollow-eyed. All of them held suitcases with luggage tags. Julian's name was on everyone. The last thing he saw before the lights went out was his reflection closing the door from the inside, smiling. The ledger downstairs turned a page. A new name was written neatly in ink. Julian Cross, room 313. End of part 4, story complete. Do you want me to craft another brand new horror story with different characters and a different style like before?